Marcus's hands trembled as he killed the Harley's engine, the sudden silence broken only by Sarah's labored breathing and the distant crash of Pacific waves against the cliffs below. The fog seemed to pulse around them like a living thing, and for a moment he wondered if he was dreaming or losing his mind. "How do you know that name?" His voice came out rougher than intended as he swung his leg over the bike. "How do you know about Elena?" Sarah doubled over with another contraction, her face pale as moonlight. When she looked up, her eyes held an otherworldly calm that made Marcus's skin crawl. "She's been waiting for you to forgive yourself, Marcus. We both have." The hospital bracelet caught his headlight as she shifted, faded plastic with that distinctive blue stripe from St. Mary's cardiac wing. He'd seen Elena wearing an identical one during those final moments in the ambulance, watched it slide from her wrist as her pulse flatlined. That bracelet should be buried 6 feet under Oregon's soil, not wrapped around this stranger's arm. Marcus forced himself into motion, muscle memory from his paramedic days overriding the supernatural dread crawling up his spine. He knelt beside Sarah, his leather jacket creaking in the damp air. "Okay, let's focus on what's real here. You're in active labor, and the nearest hospital is 40 miles through fog that's thick as soup. When did your contractions start?" 3 hours ago. Sarah gripped his forearm with surprising strength. "But this baby isn't waiting for hospitals, Marcus. Some things can't be born in sterile rooms under fluorescent lights." The rational part of his mind cataloged the medical facts: advanced labor, possible complications, no backup. But 15 years of guilt had taught him to recognize when the universe was settling accounts. He'd walked away from medicine the night Elena Vasquez died because he couldn't handle losing another patient. Now here was another pregnant woman, alone and vulnerable, speaking impossible words in the exact spot where 3 separate accidents had claimed lives over the past decade. Miller's Crossing had always been cursed ground. "We need to get you somewhere warm," Marcus said, scanning the fog-shrouded landscape. The old Moonrise Diner sat empty a quarter-mile up the road, its neon sign dark for the past 5 years. Not ideal, but better than delivering a baby on wet asphalt. "Can you ride?" Sarah nodded, then gasped as another contraction hit. "Elena said you'd know what to do. She said you've been carrying her death like a stone in your chest, but stones can become foundations if you let them." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. Those weren't just Elena's words. They were the exact phrase he'd whispered to himself every morning for 15 years, staring at his reflection in the mirror above his bathroom sink. No one else could know that. No one. He helped Sarah to her feet, noting how she moved with the careful grace of someone accustomed to carrying otherworldly weight. Her pregnancy looked full-term, but something about her presence felt ancient, timeless. When she smiled, it reminded him of Elena's final expression. Not fear or pain, but a strange sort of peace, as if she understood something he didn't. The Harley rumbled to life, and Marcus felt Sarah's arms wrap around his waist as they pulled onto the empty highway. Through the fog, the abandoned diner materialized like a ship emerging from a dream. Its windows were dark, but the door hung slightly ajar as if waiting for them. Inside, dust motes danced in his flashlight beam, and the air smelled of old grease and forgotten conversations. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, and behind the counter, a coffee pot sat half full despite the diner being closed for years. Marcus tried not to think about how that was possible. "This will work," Sarah said, settling into a corner booth with practiced ease. "Elena delivered her daughter in a place just like this. Did you know that?" Marcus froze in the act of clearing debris from a nearby table. "Elena's baby died with her in the ambulance. There was no daughter." "Are you certain?" Sarah's eyes glittered in the flashlight beam. "Or is that just what you needed to believe to survive?" Another contraction seized her, stronger this time, and Sarah's grip on the table edge left finger impressions in the old formica. Marcus pushed aside the metaphysical questions flooding his mind and fell back on training that had once been second nature. Whatever supernatural forces were at work here, a woman was about to give birth, and that remained brutally, beautifully real. As he gathered napkins and searched for clean water, Marcus caught his reflection in the diner's grimy windows. For just a moment, He could swear he saw Elena Vasquez standing behind him, her hand resting on Sarah's shoulder, both women watching him with expressions of infinite patience. The child coming into this fog-wrapped world would demand answers he wasn't sure he was ready to give. But 15 years of running had brought him here, to this moment, and Marcus Rodriguez finally understood that some appointments with destiny could never be postponed. The ordinary world. But that revelation would have to wait. Sarah's breathing had shifted into the rhythm Marcus remembered from countless emergency calls, the deep, focused pattern of a woman's body preparing for birth. He pushed Elena's ghostly presence from his mind and focused on the immediate crisis. Whatever supernatural forces had orchestrated this moment, his hands still remembered how to save lives. "Talk to me about the timing," Marcus said, checking his watch. 3:15 a.m. "How far apart are the contractions now?" "Every 4 minutes." Sarah's voice remained steady despite the pain. "Getting stronger." Marcus nodded, falling into the familiar cadence of medical assessment. His fingers found her pulse, elevated but strong. Her skin felt warm, not feverish. Good signs. "First baby?" Something flickered across Sarah's face. In a way. Before he could ask what that meant, her next contraction hit with brutal intensity. Sarah's back arched, and she gripped the booth's edge so hard the old vinyl split under her fingernails. Marcus timed it. 45 seconds of hard labor. They were running out of time. "Okay, we're doing this here," he said, stripping off his leather jacket. The familiar weight of responsibility settled across his shoulders like an old friend returning. "I need to check how far along you are." Sarah nodded, and as Marcus helped her lie back in the booth, muscle memory took over. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, the same steady confidence that had once made him one of Portland General's most requested paramedics. Before Elena, before everything fell apart. 8 centimeters, he announced. "This baby's coming whether we're ready or not." That's when the coffee pot behind the counter began to gurgle. Marcus froze, watching steam rise from the ancient machine. The diner had been closed for 5 years. No power, no gas, no logical explanation for fresh coffee brewing in an abandoned restaurant at 3 in the morning. But the rich aroma filled the air, warm and oddly comforting. "Elena always said coffee helped with night shifts," Sarah murmured, as if brewing phantom beverages was perfectly normal. She worked the graveyard rotation at St. Mary's for 3 years before she got pregnant. "How do you know about Elena's work schedule?" Marcus's voice came out sharper than intended. "Who told you about her?" Sarah's eyes met his in the flashlight's beam. She did. Another contraction seized her before Marcus could process that impossible statement. He pushed the supernatural elements aside and focused on what he could control. Delivery was imminent. Sarah needed him to be the paramedic he'd once been, not the broken man he'd become. The next 20 minutes blurred into a rhythm of breathing, encouragement, and clinical assessment. Marcus's hands moved with remembered skill, 15 years of guilt and self-doubt temporarily forgotten. This was what he'd been born to do: stand between life and death, catch souls as they entered the world. "I can see the head," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "One more push, Sarah." The final contraction came like a tidal wave, and suddenly Marcus was holding a perfect baby girl, pink and screaming and absolutely undeniably alive. Relief flooded through him so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. After Elena, he'd wondered if he'd lost the ability to bring life into the world instead of watching it slip away. "She's beautiful," he whispered, wrapping the infant in his flannel shirt. 10 fingers, 10 toes, good color. Strong lungs. Sarah reached for her daughter with trembling arms, and as the baby settled against her chest, something extraordinary happened. The fog outside the diner windows began to thin, revealing the first pale hints of dawn. The coffee pot fell silent, and for just a moment, the abandoned restaurant felt alive again, filled with the phantom conversations of truckers and travelers who'd once found refuge here. "What's her name?" Marcus asked, cleaning his hands with napkins and bottled water. "Hope," Sarah said without hesitation. "Her name is Hope." Marcus sank into the opposite booth, exhaustion and adrenaline warring in his bloodstream. He'd just delivered a healthy baby in an abandoned diner, guided by instincts he'd thought were buried forever. The supernatural elements of the night felt less important now than the undeniable fact that he'd remembered how to save instead of lose. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice soft but carrying unexpected weight. "Elena knew you were the right person to bring her daughter into the world." Elena's daughter died 15 years ago. But even as Marcus said it, he was staring at baby Hope's face, the delicate features, the dark hair, the way her tiny fist curled around Sarah's finger. Something about the infant felt familiar, like an echo of a melody he'd heard in dreams. Did she? Sarah's smile held secrets Marcus wasn't sure he wanted to uncover. Or, have you been carrying more than guilt all these years? Outside, true dawn was breaking over the Pacific, burning away the last tendrils of fog. The long night was ending, but Marcus suspected his ordinary world, 15 years of routine guilt and careful isolation, had just been shattered forever. Some debts, it seemed, could only be paid forward. Marcus stared at the baby in Sarah's arms, his medical training warring with growing dread. Hope's features were impossibly delicate, her dark hair still damp from birth, but it was her eyes that made his breath catch. When they fluttered open for a brief moment, they held an ancient awareness that no newborn should possess. "What did you mean?" His voice cracked like dry leather. "What did you mean about Elena's daughter?" Sarah adjusted the flannel shirt around Hope, her movements gentle but deliberate. "Elena Vasquez was 23 when she died in your ambulance 15 years ago, 7 months pregnant with her first child, a daughter she'd already named Hope." Marcus's hands began to shake. "The baby died with her. I felt for a pulse. There was nothing." "You felt what your guilt allowed you to feel." Sarah's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "But Elena's daughter lived long enough to take one breath, long enough to cry once, long enough for her mother to whisper a prayer that transcended the boundaries between life and death." The abandoned diner suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in like a trap. Marcus stumbled backward, knocking over an empty coffee cup that clattered against the floor with impossible loudness. "That's not possible. I would have known. I would have heard." "The storm was too loud," Sarah interrupted. "You were fighting to save Elena, trying to restart her heart. You missed the small miracle happening inches away." Marcus's mind reeled, replaying that nightmare December night frame by frame. The blizzard pounding his ambulance, Elena's blood pressure crashing, her final whispered words about forgiveness and stones becoming foundations. But now, like photographs developing in chemical baths, he remembered other details. A sound that might have been crying, a flutter of movement he'd dismissed as muscle spasms, the way Elena's hand had moved protectively over her belly even as she died. "You're saying I let a baby die while I was trying to save her mother. I'm saying you saved them both." Sarah's eyes blazed with supernatural intensity. "Elena died knowing her daughter would be given another chance. Hope died knowing she'd return when you were ready to understand what redemption really means." The coffee pot behind the counter began brewing again, steam rising like incense in a cathedral. Marcus watched it with growing hysteria. Nothing about this night followed natural law. The fog, the abandoned diner coming alive, Sarah's impossible knowledge, and now a dead woman's baby reborn 15 years later with the same name and face. "This is insane." He laughed, the sound bitter and broken. "I'm hallucinating. Post-traumatic stress finally caught up with me." Sarah stood slowly, cradling Hope against her chest. In the dawn light filtering through grimy windows, both mother and child seemed to shimmer, as if they weren't quite solid. "Marcus Rodriguez, you have a choice to make." Her words hit him like a physical blow. This was it, the moment every fiber of his being had been dreading since he'd found her at Miller's Crossing. Not just helping with a difficult birth, but something far more demanding and dangerous. "You can walk away," Sarah continued, stepping closer. "Return to your garage, your routine guilt, your careful isolation. Pretend tonight never happened. Spend the rest of your life wondering if you imagined it all." Hope stirred in her arms, making the soft sounds newborns make when settling into the world. So normal, so innocent, except for the impossible circumstances of her existence. Or, Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer, or you can accept that some debts transcend death, that Elena's prayer 15 years ago created a bridge between worlds, and you're the only one who can help hope cross it safely. Sarah's smile held equal parts warmth and warning, but choosing to help her means accepting that everything you thought you knew about life, death, and redemption was just the beginning of a much larger story. Marcus looked around the diner, noting how it seemed more solid now, more real. The phantom coffee smelled genuine. The morning light revealed details that shouldn't exist in an abandoned building: fresh napkins in the dispensers, clean silverware behind the counter, a calendar on the wall showing the correct month and year, despite being closed since 2019. What happens if I choose to help? Then you discover what Elena's daughter was really born to do. Sarah's expression grew serious. And you learn whether your guilt has been penance or preparation. Outside, the fog had completely lifted, revealing Highway 101 stretching empty in both directions. His Harley sat where he'd left it, chrome gleaming in the sunrise, offering escape back to his ordinary world of engines and solitude. 15 years of careful isolation beckoned like a familiar drug. But baby Hope chose that moment to open her eyes fully, and Marcus saw Elena's face reflected in those impossible depths, not accusatory or angry, but filled with patient hope. She'd been waiting 15 years for him to understand that some mistakes couldn't be undone, only transformed into something larger than regret. The choice hung before him like a door opening onto uncharted territory, and Marcus realized his ordinary world had already disappeared the moment he'd stopped at Miller's Crossing. Marcus stood frozen between two realities, his motorcycle keys heavy in his palm. The rational part of his mind screamed that walking away was the only sane choice. Return to his garage, his predictable routine of rebuilding engines and avoiding human contact. Pretend Sarah and baby Hope were just elaborate hallucinations born from 15 years of unprocessed trauma. But his hands still trembled from the miracle of delivery, still remembered the weight of new life emerging into the world. How could he pretend away something so viscerally real? "I don't know how to do this," he whispered, voicing the fear that had kept him running for 15 years. "I don't know how to be responsible for someone else's life again." Sarah shifted Hope to one arm, reaching across the space between them to touch his shoulder. Her fingers felt solid, warm, undeniably human. "You think you failed Elena?" "I know I failed her." The words tasted like ashes. "She died in my ambulance while I stood there helpless. Her baby, Hope, died because I wasn't good enough, fast enough, skilled enough to save them both. And what if I told you Elena's death wasn't your failure?" Sarah's voice carried the weight of absolute truth. "What if it was her choice?" Marcus jerked away from her touch. "Nobody chooses to die in childbirth during a blizzard. Elena knew she was dying before you ever reached her." Sarah's eyes held depths of knowledge that made his skin crawl. The placental abruption had already done too much damage, but she also knew her daughter could still be saved, not in the way you understand saving, but in a way that transcends medicine. The abandoned diner suddenly felt like a courtroom where he'd been called to answer for crimes he'd spent 15 years trying to forget. Every surface seemed to reflect Elena's face: the windows, the chrome fixtures, even the dark coffee in the phantom pot. All of them watching, waiting for him to understand something just beyond his grasp. "You're asking me to believe in supernatural resurrection." His laugh came out harsh and desperate. "You want me to accept that a dead baby can be reborn 15 years later to... what? Give me a second chance at redemption?" "I'm asking you to believe that love is stronger than death," Sarah replied simply. "That a mother's prayer can create bridges across impossible spaces. That some debts can only be paid by helping others cross those bridges safely." Hope began to fuss, the small sounds echoing strangely in the empty diner. Marcus found himself stepping closer, despite every instinct screaming at him to run. The baby's face was perfect, Elena's delicate features rendered in miniature, but something else too. An otherworldly patience that made his chest tight with recognition. "What happens to her if I say no?" The question escaped before he could stop it, revealing the hook that was already sinking deep into his conscience. Sarah's expression grew sad. Then hope fades back into the space between worlds, taking with her any chance Elena has of finding peace. And you spend the rest of your life knowing you chose fear over healing. Twice. The weight of that possibility crashed over him like a physical blow. Bad enough that he'd failed to save Elena and her daughter 15 years ago. But to be offered a chance at redemption and walk away. To choose his safe, guilty isolation over the terrifying possibility of purpose? Yet the stakes felt impossibly high. Sarah was asking him to abandon everything he understood about reality, to step into a world where the supernatural operated by rules he couldn't comprehend. What if he failed again? What if his involvement somehow made things worse? "I'm not a hero," Marcus said, hating how weak his voice sounded. "I'm just a mechanic who used to be a paramedic before he screwed up badly enough to destroy lives. Heroes are just people who show up when they're needed most." Sarah's smile carried echoes of Elena's final expression, peaceful acceptance mixed with unshakable hope. "Elena didn't need you to be perfect, Marcus. She needed you to be present." Through the diner windows, Highway 101 stretched toward his ordinary life like a lifeline. His garage waited 40 miles away, filled with broken engines he could actually fix, problems with logical solutions and predictable outcomes. No supernatural babies, no impossible debts transcending death, no crushing responsibility for miracles he didn't understand. But Hope chose that moment to wrap her tiny fingers around his index finger, her grip surprisingly strong for someone only minutes old. The contact sent electricity racing up his arm, carrying with it a flash of Elena's final moments. Not the medical crisis he remembered, but something deeper. A young mother's desperate prayer that her daughter would find her way back to the light, guided by the man who'd tried so hard to save them both. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 15 years' worth of guilt warring with something that might have been hope. When he opened them again, Sarah was watching him with infinite patience, as if she had all the time in the world for him to make the most important choice of his life. The keys to his Harley felt heavier than ever. Marcus stared down at Hope's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, feeling the pulse of her heartbeat against his skin. Steady, strong, impossibly real. The electricity of that contact seemed to short-circuit every rational argument his mind had been constructing. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't trauma-induced psychosis. This was choice, raw and demanding, stripping away 15 years of carefully constructed defenses. He looked up at Sarah, whose otherworldly patience suddenly felt less comforting than terrifying. She wasn't going to argue with him or plead her case. She was simply waiting, as if his decision was as inevitable as sunrise, as predetermined as the fog lifting from Highway 101. "If I do this," he said slowly, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "If I help you, help Hope, what exactly are you asking me to do?" Sarah's smile deepened, and for a moment he glimpsed something vast and ancient behind her eyes. Elena's daughter exists between worlds right now, born into death, reborn into possibility. But to fully cross back into life, she needs an anchor, someone who understands both loss and healing, someone willing to guide her through the spaces where the living and dead intersect. That's not an answer. That's mystical nonsense. "Is it?" Sarah gestured toward the coffee pot, still brewing its impossible contents. "Look around you, Marcus. This diner has been dead for 5 years, but tonight it came alive to shelter a birth. The fog rolled in specifically to bring you to Miller's Crossing at the exact moment I needed you. Hope was born knowing your touch, responding to your voice like she'd been waiting her whole life, both lives, to meet you." Marcus wanted to argue, but the evidence surrounded him. Every rational explanation he'd tried to construct had crumbled against the persistent reality of the supernatural. The abandoned diner hummed with phantom life. Steam continued rising from equipment that should have been cold and disconnected. Even the morning light filtering through the windows seemed different, softer, more golden, as if the ordinary laws of physics had bent to accommodate something sacred. Hope stirred against his finger, making the soft mewling sounds that newborns make when dreaming. Such a normal, human sound, yet it carried weight that made his chest ache. This wasn't just about helping Sarah, or even about his guilt over Elena. This baby represented something larger, a bridge between the mistake he'd made and the man he might still become. What if I'm not strong enough? The admission escaped like a confession. What if I fail her the way I failed her mother? Then you fail while trying, instead of failing by running away. Sarah's voice held no judgment, only truth. Elena's prayer didn't ask for your perfection, Marcus. It asked for your presence, your willingness to stand witness as impossible things become real. The keys to his Harley bit into his palm as his grip tightened. He could see his motorcycle through the window, chrome gleaming with promise of escape. 40 miles to his garage, to his small apartment above the shop, to the careful isolation that had protected him from exactly this kind of soul-deep responsibility. He could be back to his routine within 2 hours, could spend the rest of his life convincing himself this had all been an elaborate breakdown. But Hope's fingers tightened around his, and suddenly Marcus was remembering not Elena's death, but her life. The way she'd talked about her unborn daughter during those final moments, her voice filled with fierce love even as her body shut down. The prayer she'd whispered, not for her own survival, but for her child's future. The absolute trust in her eyes as she'd looked at him and said, "Promise me you'll remember that broken things can still hold light." He'd thought she was talking about herself, about finding peace in her final moments. Now he understood she'd been talking about him. "I don't know how to do this," he said again, but this time the words carried different weight. Not refusal, but acknowledgement of the magnitude of what he was accepting. Sarah nodded as if she'd been waiting for exactly that admission. Elena didn't know how to die and save her daughter simultaneously. I didn't know how to carry a soul across 15 years and 2 worlds. Hope doesn't know how to be born into life after experiencing death. None of us know how to do the impossible until we're doing it. Marcus looked around the diner one last time, noting how it seemed to pulse with potential energy. The phantom conversations of long-dead truckers echoed in the corners, the smell of coffee mixed with something else. Something that reminded him of hospital corridors and the moment between heartbeats when miracles were still possible. His motorcycle waited outside, offering escape back to everything safe and predictable and small. Hope opened her eyes and looked directly at him, and Marcus saw Elena's soul reflected there. Not lost, not angry, but filled with patient hope that he would finally understand what redemption really meant. The choice crystallized in that moment, as clear and inevitable as dawn breaking over the Pacific. Marcus Rodriguez placed his keys on the diner counter with deliberate finality, the metal clattering against Formica like a door slamming shut on his old life. "Tell me what we need to do." Sarah's smile transformed into something radiant and terrible, like dawn breaking over a battlefield. "First, you need to understand what you've just committed to." She cradled Hope closer, the baby's eyes still fixed on Marcus with unsettling intensity. The living world and the space between worlds operate by different rules. Hope exists in both right now, but that balance is fragile. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, the diner's front door chimed, the same cheerful bell that had welcomed truckers and travelers for decades. But the sound sent ice through his veins because no one had touched the door. A man stepped inside, tall and gaunt with silver hair and clothes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His presence made the air thick and oppressive, like the moment before lightning strikes. The phantom coffee pot sputtered and died. The warm golden light filtering through the windows dimmed to gray. "Detective Ray Hawkins," the stranger said, voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Oregon State Police." He flashed a badge that looked official enough, though something about it made Marcus's eyes water when he tried to focus on the details. Hope began to cry, not the soft fussing of a newborn, but sharp wails of genuine distress. Sarah stepped protectively behind Marcus, her earlier supernatural confidence replaced by something approaching fear. "Mr. Rodriguez," Hawkins continued, his gaze moving between Marcus and the baby with predatory interest. "We've had reports of unusual activity in this area. Missing persons, unexplained phenomena. I'm going to need you to hand over the child." Every instinct Marcus had developed during 15 years as a paramedic screamed danger. Real cops didn't work alone in the middle of nowhere. Real badges didn't hurt to look at. Real police officers didn't make the air temperature drop 10 degrees just by walking into a room. "This baby was just born," Marcus said carefully, positioning himself more firmly between Hawkins and Sarah. "She needs medical attention, not police intervention." Hawkins smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white. "Oh, I'll make sure she receives exactly the kind of attention she requires. You see, some things don't belong in the living world. Some births create complications that need to be resolved before they spread." The abandoned diner groaned around them, its phantom life flickering like a candle in wind. Dust began falling from the ceiling. The cheerful yellow walls faded to institutional gray. Whatever force had brought this place alive to shelter Hope's birth, Hawkins was unraveling it with his mere presence. "You're not a cop," Marcus stated, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "I'm something far more necessary." Hawkins took another step forward, and the floorboards beneath his feet turned black, as if scorched. "I maintain the boundaries between life and death. Ensure that things which should stay buried remain in their graves. Prevent the kind of unauthorized resurrections that threaten the natural order." Sarah's hand gripped Marcus's shoulder, her touch carrying a jolt of desperate energy. "He's a threshold guardian," she whispered urgently. "They exist to prevent souls from crossing back. If he takes Hope, she'll be properly returned to whatever space dead children occupy," Hawkins interrupted, his hearing apparently supernatural. "Along with anyone foolish enough to assist in her illegal transit between worlds." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus felt 15 years of guilt and self-recrimination warring with something newer and more powerful, the fierce protectiveness that had driven him to become a paramedic in the first place. The need to stand between innocent life and the forces that would destroy it. Hope's cries intensified, but underneath the infant distress, Marcus heard something else. A resonance that reminded him of Elena's final words, of promises made in ambulances during winter storms, of the moment when he'd felt her daughter's heart beat against his palm for the first time. "No," he said simply. Hawkins raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "I said no." Marcus stepped forward, feeling Sarah's surprised relief behind him. "I don't know what you are or what authority you think you represent, but you're not taking this baby anywhere." The false detective's smile vanished, replaced by something cold and ancient. "Mr. Rodriguez, you have no idea what forces you're interfering with. The boundaries between life and death exist for good reasons. Some bridges shouldn't be crossed." "Maybe not." Marcus felt heat building in his chest, the same fierce determination that had once driven him to fight for patients everyone else had written off. "But I made a promise 15 years ago, and I'm not breaking it now." Around them, the diner began to stabilize. The walls regained their yellow warmth. The coffee pot resumed its phantom brewing. Hope's cries softened to manageable fussing. Hawkins's expression darkened like storm clouds gathering. "This isn't over, Marcus Rodriguez. The threshold has rules, and you've just declared war on forces beyond your comprehension." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Enjoy your brief victory. When the real tests begin, remember that some prices are paid by everyone you've ever cared about." The door chimed as he left, but the sound now carried undertones of warning, like funeral bells echoing across impossible distances. Marcus stood frozen in the aftermath of Hawkins's departure, the echo of those funeral bells still reverberating through his bones. The diner felt different now, not just alive with phantom energy, but charged with the electricity of approaching storm. Through the windows, the morning fog was thickening again, rolling in from the Pacific with unnatural speed and purpose. "Everyone you've ever cared about," he repeated, the words tasting like copper pennies in his mouth. His mind immediately went to Danny, his 28-year-old nephew who ran the garage's afternoon shift, to Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who brought him homemade soup when she thought he was looking too thin, to the handful of people who'd somehow wormed their way past his carefully constructed walls over the years. "He meant that threat," Sarah said quietly, settling into one of the diner's cracked vinyl booths with Hope. The baby had stopped crying but remained alert, her dark eyes tracking movements with an intensity that made Marcus's skin crawl. Threshold guardians don't make idle promises. Marcus began pacing the length of the diner, his paramedic training kicking in automatically. When facing a crisis, you assessed resources, identified threats, created action plans. The problem was that none of his experience had prepared him for supernatural warfare. "Tell me what we're really up against," he demanded. "No more mystical riddles, no more gentle explanations about bridges between worlds. If I'm going to protect this baby, protect everyone I care about, I need to understand exactly what's coming for us." Sarah looked down at Hope, who was making soft cooing sounds that seemed to carry harmonic overtones impossible for a newborn. "The threshold exists to maintain balance between life and death. Guardians like Hawkins patrol the boundaries, ensuring that souls cross only once and only in the proper direction. What we've done, what Elena's prayer accomplished, is technically a violation of cosmic law." "Cosmic law," Marcus repeated flatly. "You're telling me we're fugitives from the universe's police force. More like cosmic immigration enforcement." Sarah's attempt at humor fell flat in the oppressive atmosphere. Hope shouldn't exist in the living world. Her presence creates ripples, disturbances that other supernatural entities can sense and exploit. Through the window, Marcus caught movement in the fog, shapes that might have been trees swaying or might have been something else entirely. The rational part of his mind insisted it was just the wind, but the part of him that had spent the last hour accepting impossible truths whispered otherwise. "What kind of disturbances?" he pressed. "Places where the dead can more easily reach through to affect the living. Spots where reality becomes thin enough for things that should stay buried to claw their way back." Sarah's voice carried the weight of terrible knowledge. The longer Hope remains in this world without proper anchoring, the worse it gets. Marcus stopped pacing. "Anchoring. You mentioned that before. What exactly does it mean?" "Hope exists between worlds right now. To fully stabilize in the living world, she needs someone to serve as her connection to life, someone who can help her navigate the space between what was and what could be." Sarah met his eyes. "Someone who understands both healing and loss intimately enough to guide a soul through resurrection." The implications hit him like a physical blow. "You're not just asking me to help, you're asking me to become—" what? Her supernatural guardian? Some kind of mystical anchor point? "Elena's prayer specifically called for you, Marcus. Not because you're perfect, but because you're the bridge between her daughter's death and her new life. You were there when Hope's soul left the first time. You're needed to help her soul fully return." Outside, the fog had thickened to near-solid walls of gray-white vapor. The morning light was failing despite the early hour, as if something was actively draining the illumination from the world. Marcus could hear sounds now, footsteps that didn't quite match any human gait, whispers in languages that predated civilization. "How long do we have?" he asked. Sarah consulted something that might have been a watch but looked more like a compass made of bone and silver. "Hawkins will report our location to other guardians. But the real danger comes from the other things that will be drawn to Hope's presence, entities that exist in the spaces between life and death, hungry for the kind of energy she radiates." As if summoned by her words, something scraped against the diner's exterior wall, a sound like fingernails on tombstone granite. Hope whimpered, and the phantom coffee pot began brewing faster, as if the building itself was trying to generate more life force to counter whatever was gathering outside. Marcus felt the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. 15 years ago, he'd failed to save Elena and her daughter through medical intervention. Now he was being asked to save Hope through means that transcended everything he understood about reality. The scraping sound came again, closer to the windows this time. "Tell me what I need to do," he said, reaching for Hope with hands that had once tried to restart her heart. "Tell me how to anchor a soul." Sarah's expression shifted into something between relief and terror. "The process isn't gentle," she warned. But before she could explain further, the diner's windows exploded inward. Glass shattered across the checkered linoleum as something that had once been human hauled itself through the broken frame. Its limbs bent at impossible angles, flesh hanging in gray tatters that revealed bone beneath. The thing's eyes were empty sockets weeping black fluid, but it tracked Hope's location with predatory precision. "Revenant," Sarah gasped, clutching Hope protectively. "They're drawn to unanchored souls like moths to flame." Marcus grabbed a chair, his paramedic instincts screaming even as his rational mind reeled. He'd seen death in every form during his career, but this was death animated by hunger, by the desperate need to reclaim what it had lost. The Revenant's jaw unhinged like a snake's as it lurched toward the baby. "How do I anchor her?" Marcus shouted, swinging the chair at the creature's head. The impact sent it stumbling, but didn't stop its advance. Physical contact with Hope while accepting the connection, Sarah called back, dodging as another window shattered. A second Revenant clawed its way inside, this one smaller, child-sized, but no less horrifying. But once you begin, you can't break contact until it's complete. If you let go, Hope dies permanently, Marcus finished, understanding flooding through him like ice water. The first Revenant recovered its balance and charged. Marcus caught it with both hands, feeling its unnaturally cold flesh squirm beneath his grip. The thing was stronger than physics should allow, fueled by supernatural hunger rather than muscle and bone. It snapped at his throat with teeth filed to points, breath smelling of grave dirt and decay. Behind him, Hope's cries intensified, but now they carried harmonic resonances that made the diner's remaining windows vibrate. The phantom coffee pot exploded, spraying spectral liquid that hissed when it touched the Revenant's skin. The abandoned building was trying to protect its occupants, but Marcus could feel its defenses weakening under the supernatural assault. "Now, Marcus." Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "While she's distressed, her connection to both worlds is strongest." The second Revenant had circled around, approaching Hope with jerky movements like a marionette controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Marcus released his grip on the first creature and dove toward Sarah, but the Revenant he'd been holding wrapped skeletal fingers around his ankle. He crashed to the floor, still reaching desperately toward the baby. His fingertips brushed Hope's small hand just as the child-sized Revenant lunged. The contact hit Marcus like lightning made of memory. Suddenly, he was experiencing Elena's death from her perspective. The crushing weight in her chest, the desperate love for a daughter she'd never hold, the prayer whispered with her final breath. But alongside Elena's memories came others. Hope's first moment of consciousness in the space between worlds. 15 years of waiting in a gray place that wasn't quite death, but certainly wasn't life. The terrible hunger to complete her interrupted journey into existence. "Accept me," Hope's soul whispered directly into his mind, her voice carrying Elena's accent and inflection. "Accept responsibility for what was broken. Let me anchor to your choice to heal instead of harm." The Revenant's claws raked across Marcus's back as the connection deepened. He could feel Hope's soul beginning to solidify in the living world, but the process was agony. Like every patient he'd ever lost was dying again simultaneously. The guilt he'd carried for 15 years erupted into conscious pain, every failure magnified and reflected through supernatural mirrors. But underneath the anguish came something else, the memory of every life he had saved. Every successful resuscitation, every trauma patient he'd stabilized long enough to reach the hospital, every small victory against death's inexorable advance. His hands, which had failed Elena, had also brought dozens of others back from the brink. "You were never meant to be perfect," Elena's voice whispered through Hope's connection. "You were meant to be present, to stand witness, to choose healing over helplessness." The Revenant attacking him suddenly shrieked and recoiled, its form beginning to dissolve like smoke in wind. The second creature, which had been reaching for Hope, stumbled backward as if struck by an invisible force. Throughout the diner, the phantom sounds of life, conversations, coffee brewing, silverware clinking, grew stronger, drowning out the whispers from whatever hungry things waited in the fog. Hope's cries softened into contented sighs. Her tiny fingers closed around Marcus's with strength that seemed impossible for a newborn, but felt exactly right for a soul that had waited 15 years to complete its journey home. The anchoring wasn't finished. Marcus could feel the process would take time, require ongoing connection and conscious choice. but the foundation had been laid. Hope existed fully in the living world now, protected by his acceptance of responsibility for her second chance at life. The remaining revenants fled through the broken windows, unable to withstand the stabilized energy radiating from the successfully anchored soul. But in the supernatural silence that followed, Marcus heard something that chilled him more than the revenants' attack. The sound of engines approaching through the fog. Multiple vehicles, moving with military precision toward the diner. Hawkins was returning, and he wasn't coming alone. The convoy materialized from the fog like a funeral procession emerging from a graveyard. 3 black SUVs with windows tinted darker than midnight, their engines purring with mechanical precision that seemed wrong in the supernatural stillness. Marcus counted at least a dozen figures emerging from the vehicles, all wearing the same gray suits as Hawkins, all moving with the same predatory grace. "Threshold Enforcement Division," Sarah whispered, her face pale as bone. "Marcus, we need to run. Now." But there was nowhere to go. The diner sat alone on this stretch of Highway 101, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and ocean cliffs on the 4th. The fog had thickened to the consistency of wet concrete, making visibility beyond 20 feet impossible. Even if they could escape the building, they'd be blind and vulnerable in terrain that favored their supernatural pursuers. Hope began crying again, but these weren't ordinary infant tears. Her distress was creating visible ripples in the air around her, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. The anchoring process had begun, but it was incomplete. She was still caught between worlds, still broadcasting her presence to every supernatural entity within miles. The baby's energy signature is too strong, Marcus realized with growing horror. She's like a beacon. They can track us anywhere. Hawkins appeared in the doorway, no longer bothering with his false police facade. His gray suit was immaculate despite the morning's supernatural chaos, but his eyes now glowed with cold blue fire. Behind him, his fellow guardians arranged themselves with military precision, blocking every possible exit. "Mr. Rodriguez," Hawkins said conversationally, stepping over the broken glass littering the floor. "You've caused quite a stir in the cosmic bureaucracy. Unauthorized soul resurrections aren't exactly common paperwork." Marcus positioned himself between the guardians and Sarah, but he could feel the futility of the gesture in his bones. These weren't human adversaries he could fight or outwit. They were enforcement agents of reality itself, backed by powers that predated civilization. "The child needs to be processed correctly," Hawkins continued, gesturing for his team to advance. "Returned to her proper place in the death realms, and her illegal anchor, that would be you, sanitized to prevent future violations." "Sanitized," Sarah repeated, the word dropping from her lips like poison. "He means they'll strip away your memories of this entire experience, make you forget Elena, forget Hope, forget that any of this ever happened." The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow, not just death, something worse than death. They would unmake everything he'd learned about himself, everything he'd discovered about the connection between healing and redemption. They would return him to the guilt-ridden shell he'd been this morning, forever wondering why he felt so empty, but never remembering what he'd lost. "Please," he said, hating the desperation in his voice. "She's just a baby. She deserves a chance to live." "She had her chance 15 years ago," Hawkins replied coldly. "What you've done is an abomination against the natural order. Some failures aren't meant to be corrected." The guardians moved closer, their presence draining warmth from the air. Frost began forming on the diner's walls despite the October weather. Hope's cries became more frantic, and Marcus could feel their incomplete connection stretching toward a breaking point that would shatter both of them. That's when Sarah made her choice. "I'm sorry, Marcus," she whispered, and before he could react, she pressed something sharp against Hope's throat. A blade made of what looked like crystallized starlight, its edge humming with energy that made reality blur around its presence. "But there's something I haven't told you about who I really am." Marcus felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "Sarah, what are you doing?" "Ensuring the mission succeeds," she replied, but her voice was changing, becoming colder, more mechanical. Did you really think the threshold would leave something this important to chance? Did you think they'd allow an unauthorized resurrection attempt without having contingencies in place? Hawkins smiled, the expression terrible in its satisfaction. Meet Agent Sarah Winters, Mr. Rodriguez, our most effective deep cover operative. She's been watching you for months, waiting for Elena's prayer to finally manifest, ensuring that, when it did, we'd be positioned to contain the damage. The betrayal hit harder than any physical blow. Sarah, the woman he'd helped through labor, the guide who'd explained the supernatural world, the ally he'd trusted with Hope's life, had been working for the enemy all along. Every moment of connection, every shared confidence, every instant when he'd felt less alone in the cosmic horror, all of it had been calculated deception. The blade will sever Hope's connection to this reality permanently, Sarah explained, her false compassion replaced by clinical detachment. No return journeys, no future resurrection attempts. Clean, final, bureaucratically acceptable. Marcus reached desperately toward Hope, but invisible force held him frozen in place. The Guardian's power wrapped around him like chains made of crystallized despair. He could only watch as the woman he'd trusted prepared to destroy everything he'd sacrificed to save. The starlight blade descended toward Hope's throat, and all seemed lost. Time fractured. As the starlight blade descended, Marcus felt something impossible happen. His perception split, showing him the same moment from multiple angles simultaneously. He saw himself frozen by Guardian power, helpless to intervene. He saw Sarah's face, clinical and cold, as she prepared to sever Hope's connection to life. He saw Hawkins watching with bureaucratic satisfaction. But he also saw something else, something that shouldn't have been possible. In the reflection of the starlight blade, Marcus glimpsed Sarah's true expression, not the cold detachment she was projecting, but raw anguish, terror, and behind her clinical words, he heard the faintest tremor of a voice breaking under impossible strain. She's fighting it, he realized with crystalline clarity. Whatever they did to her, part of her is still fighting. The revelation hit him like lightning. The threshold hadn't just recruited Sarah. They did compromised her somehow, turned her into something she'd never chosen to be. The woman who'd guided him through Hope's birth, who'd explained the supernatural world with genuine compassion, was still there beneath the programmed responses. "Sarah," he called out, pouring every ounce of conviction into her name. "Remember Hope's first breath. Remember how it felt to help a soul choose life." For an instant, the blade wavered. Sarah's hand trembled as conflicting impulses warred across her features. The clinical mask slipped, revealing the woman he'd trusted underneath, terrified, desperate, but still fighting against whatever control the Guardians had imposed. "I can't," she gasped, the words torn from her throat. "They'll unmake me completely if I—" "You already chose," Marcus pressed, understanding flooding through him. "When you helped deliver Hope, when you explained anchoring, you've been fighting them this entire time, haven't you? Giving me information they never wanted me to have." Hawkins stepped forward sharply. "Agent Winters, complete your assignment." But Sarah was shaking now, the starlight blade wavering dangerously close to Hope's throat. "Marcus, the real Sarah died 3 years ago. They rebuilt me from her memories, programmed me to be their perfect operative. But something went wrong during Hope's birth. Helping bring her back triggered something they couldn't control." The truth crashed over Marcus like a tide of ice water. Sarah was like Hope, a soul reconstructed, caught between worlds, anchored to existence by forces beyond normal understanding. But where Hope had been anchored by love and prayer, Sarah had been chained by duty and supernatural bureaucracy. "The memories of helping her," Sarah continued, tears streaming down her face as she fought against her programming. "They feel more real than anything else I remember. More real than my orders, my mission, my entire constructed identity." "Because they are real," Marcus said softly. "Choice creates reality. Love creates anchoring. You chose to help Hope live. That choice is more fundamental than any programming they forced on you." The other Guardians were moving now, sensing their operative's malfunction. But Hope had begun glowing with soft golden light, her incomplete anchoring to Marcus, somehow extending to embrace Sarah as well. The baby was connecting to both of them, the man who'd failed to save her mother and the woman who'd been rebuilt as a weapon, but had chosen to be a guardian instead. "I remember now," Sarah whispered, the blade in her hand beginning to dissolve like frost in sunlight. "I remember choosing, not just during Hope's birth, but in that moment 3 years ago when I died. I chose to come back, chose to accept reconstruction, because I thought I could protect people from the inside. I volunteered." Hawkins's composure finally cracked. "Impossible. We suppressed those memories completely." "You suppressed Sarah Winters, the operative," she replied, standing straighter as golden light flowed through her like liquid courage. "But you never touched Sarah, the choice maker. Sarah, the protector. Sarah, the woman who would die again before harming an innocent child." The starlight blade vanished entirely, leaving Sarah holding empty air. Around them, the Guardian's supernatural restraints began weakening, as Hope's anchoring process completed itself not through Marcus alone, but through the combined will of 3 souls who'd chosen healing over harm. Marcus felt the cosmic shift like tectonic plates settling into new positions. Hope wasn't just anchored to him anymore. She was connected to a network of choice and sacrifice that included Sarah's rebellion against her programming. The baby existed in the living world now not as a violation of cosmic law, but as the center of something unprecedented, a chosen family forged in supernatural fire. "Stand down, all of you," Sarah commanded, turning to face Hawkins with authority that transcended his bureaucratic power. "I invoke Threshold Protocol 7, investigative suspension pending review of unauthorized reconstruction procedures." Hawkins's eyes widened. "You can't possibly remember the protocols. You made sure the operative wouldn't remember." Sarah smiled grimly. "But the woman who memorized them before volunteering for reconstruction? She remembers everything now." The fog around the diner began lifting, revealing a world transformed. The revelation had shifted more than just their understanding. It had changed the fundamental nature of their situation. They weren't fugitives anymore. They were the investigation. The world held its breath for 3 heartbeats after Sarah's declaration. Marcus watched Hawkins's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and something that might have been fear before settling into bureaucratic calculation. The other Guardians remained frozen in place, their supernatural restraints wavering as conflicting orders warred against protocol. "Protocol 7 is a myth," Hawkins said finally, but his voice carried less conviction than before. "A theoretical safeguard that was never meant to." Article 47, subsection C, Sarah recited with mechanical precision. "Any operative discovering evidence of unauthorized reconstruction procedures within Threshold Division operations may invoke immediate investigative suspension, pending full review by the Cosmic Compliance Board." She paused, tilting her head. "Would you like me to continue with the subsections regarding penalties for obstruction?" Marcus felt something shift in his chest, not just relief, but recognition. This wasn't the programmed operative or the compassionate guide he'd known. This was Sarah Winters, the investigator, the woman who'd volunteered for reconstruction because she believed the system could be reformed from within. Her true personality was finally emerging from beneath layers of imposed conditioning. Hope cooed softly in his arms, her golden glow steadying into a warm pulse that seemed to strengthen both him and Sarah. The baby's presence was no longer chaotic or desperate. She existed fully in this reality now, anchored not just by his acceptance, but by the choice all 3 of them had made to protect each other. Hawkins, one of the other Guardians, spoke for the first time, his voice carrying undertones of authority that made the supervisor flinch. "If Protocol 7 has been invoked, we're required to withdraw pending review. Director Morrison will have both our assignments for this," Hawkins hissed. "Director Morrison will have our assignments if we violate compliance protocols during an active investigation," the Guardian corrected. "Agent Winters has cause. The reconstruction procedures used on her were clearly flawed if her original personality is emerging with this level of clarity." Marcus watched the supernatural bureaucracy play out with fascination and growing hope. Sarah's rebellion hadn't just freed her from conditioning. It had revealed systemic problems that even the Threshold Division couldn't ignore. Her memories returning meant other reconstructed operatives might be similarly compromised. "How long do we have?" he asked Sarah quietly. 72 hours minimum, she replied, her investigator's mind already working through possibilities. But probably longer. A full compliance review requires examining every reconstruction case from the last decade. That's hundreds of files, dozens of operatives who might be experiencing similar memory breakthrough. She bounced Hope gently, and the baby's contented sighs felt like victory bells ringing. Plus, they can't touch any of us during an active investigation without risking cosmic court intervention. We're protected witnesses now. The Guardians were already withdrawing to their vehicles, moving with the efficient disappointment of bureaucrats whose paperwork had suddenly become exponentially more complicated. Hawkins lingered in the doorway, his glowing eyes fixed on Hope with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. "This isn't over," the supervisor said. "Compliance reviews can be influenced. The natural order will reassert itself eventually." "Maybe," Sarah agreed calmly. "But Hope isn't going anywhere in the meantime, and neither are we." After the convoy disappeared back into the fog, Marcus found himself alone with Sarah and Hope in the supernatural quiet of the diner. The phantom sounds of life, coffee brewing, conversations, silverware clinking, had settled into a comfortable background hum as if the building itself was finally at peace. "So what now?" he asked, settling into one of the booths with Hope cradled against his chest. "We can't exactly go back to our normal lives." Sarah slid into the seat across from him, her expression thoughtful. "Normal lives were never really an option, were they? You've been carrying Elena's death for 15 years, I've been dead for 3, and Hope—" She reached across to stroke the baby's cheek. "Hope never had a normal life to begin with. But we could build something new," Marcus said, the idea crystallizing as he spoke. "Hope needs parents who understand what she is, what she's been through. You need time to reclaim your own identity, separate from what they programmed you to be. And I need purpose," Sarah finished softly. "Something better than just carrying guilt." The golden light pulsing gently from Hope seemed to encompass all 3 of them now, binding them together with threads stronger than blood or bureaucracy. They were an impossible family, a failed paramedic, a reconstructed operative, and a twice-born child, but they were whole in a way none of them had been alone. Outside, Marcus could hear the fog finally beginning to lift, revealing the ordinary world beyond their supernatural sanctuary. There would be challenges ahead. Compliance reviews, cosmic bureaucrats, and the everyday difficulties of raising a child who existed between worlds. But for the first time in 15 years, Marcus felt equal to whatever came next. He had allies now. He had purpose. Most importantly, he had hope. Marcus stood at the diner's entrance 3 days later, a diaper bag slung over his shoulder and Hope secured in a borrowed car seat. The ordinary weight of baby supplies, formula, blankets, tiny clothes Sarah had somehow procured from town, felt surreal after everything they'd endured. But this was what commitment looked like, not grand gestures or supernatural confrontations, but the steady accumulation of daily choices. "You sure about this?" Sarah asked, adjusting the straps of her own pack. Her voice carried none of the programmed attachment from before, but uncertainty lingered beneath her restored memories. "Once we leave here, we're committed to whatever comes next. No cosmic sanctuary to retreat to." Marcus looked back at the diner one last time. The building had served its purpose as a place between worlds, but Hope belonged in the living realm now. "They all did. I've been running from consequences for 15 years, he said. "Time to face them head on." They walked toward his motorcycle, parked where this impossible journey had begun. He'd rigged a sidecar attachment overnight, crude but functional, designed to safely transport a baby who shouldn't exist but undeniably did. The sight of it filled him with equal measures of terror and determination. "Marcus." Sarah's hand found his arm. "There's something you need to know about what we're walking into. The compliance review, it's not just bureaucratic procedure. Director Morrison has been systematically eliminating evidence of unauthorized resurrections for decades. She won't let us reach the Cosmic Compliance Board if she can help it. The weight of what they were attempting settled fully on his shoulders. They weren't just protecting hope anymore. They were challenging an entire system that preferred death's finality to love's persistence. Then we make sure we can't be eliminated quietly. He pulled out his phone, scrolled to a contact he hadn't called in 5 years. Dr. Patricia Chen, his former supervisor at the hospital, now chief of emergency medicine in Portland. Someone who'd witnessed his guilt-driven self-destruction, but might still remember the paramedic who'd saved dozens of lives before failing to save one. Patricia? It's Marcus Rodriguez. No, I'm not calling about a job. I need you to document something. Something that's going to sound impossible. Over the next hour, Marcus dictated their entire story into Patricia's medical recorder. Every detail of Hope's birth, Sarah's revelation about the threshold division, the existence of supernatural bureaucracies that police the boundary between life and death. He included GPS coordinates, timestamps, even photos of the diner's impossible interior. Marcus. Patricia's voice carried professional concern edged with disbelief. You know how this sounds. I know exactly how it sounds. But in 72 hours, if you don't hear from me again, I need you to forward everything to every medical journal, news outlet, and government contact you can think of. Make it impossible to suppress. Sarah watched with growing approval as he made similar calls to 3 other contacts: a journalist who'd covered medical malpractice cases, a lawyer who specialized in wrongful death suits, and his former partner from the ambulance service. By the time he finished, their story existed in multiple copies across the normal world. Insurance policy, he explained, securing the phone in his jacket. Morrison can make us disappear, but she can't silence everyone we've told without creating exactly the kind of attention the threshold division wants to avoid. Hope began fussing as they prepared to leave, her golden glow flickering with infant anxiety. Marcus lifted her from the car seat, feeling their connection pulse with shared determination. She was no longer just a child he'd helped save. She was his daughter now, in every way that mattered. Hey there, little fighter, he murmured against her tiny forehead. Ready to see what the world looks like? Sarah climbed into the sidecar, arranging blankets to shield Hope from the wind. Where exactly are we headed? Portland first, to establish legal guardianship through normal channels. Then Seattle to the Regional Threshold Division office. Marcus started the engine, its familiar rumble grounding him in the physical world. If we're going to challenge the cosmic bureaucracy, we do it from a position of human legal strength. They won't let us reach Seattle. Probably not. But they'll have to stop us publicly now, with witnesses and documentation already in place. Every action they take against us becomes evidence of the system Sarah uncovered. As they pulled onto Highway 101, Marcus felt the familiar weight of emergency medical training settling over his shoulders. But this time, instead of racing towards someone else's crisis, he was carrying his own injured family toward healing. The patient was Hope's right to exist, Sarah's stolen identity, and his own 15-year exile from meaningful work. The morning fog clung to the coastal hills like doubt made visible, but sunlight was breaking through in golden shafts that illuminated the road ahead. Whatever Director Morrison had planned for them, whatever supernatural forces would try to unmake their impossible family, Marcus was done retreating. He'd found his purpose in protecting Hope. Now it was time to finish what Elena's prayer had started. The attack came 20 miles outside of Portland, where Highway 101 curved through dense forest that swallowed sound and concealed intent. Marcus felt it first as a wrongness in the air, the same supernatural pressure he'd learned to recognize at the diner, but focused now with predatory precision. His medical training kicked in automatically: assess the threat, protect the patient, adapt to changing conditions. "Sarah?" he called over the engine noise, downshifting as the motorcycle began struggling against an invisible resistance. "We've got company." She was already scanning the tree line, her restored investigator instincts sharp as surgical steel. 2 vehicles approaching from behind, moving faster than physics should allow. Morrison's people. Hope began crying in the sidecar, her golden glow flickering erratically as supernatural forces pressed against their small family unit. Marcus could feel her distress through their anchoring connection, not just infant discomfort, but existential terror as the cosmic bureaucracy tried to convince reality that she didn't belong in it. The first Guardian vehicle materialized from the fog ahead of them, blocking the highway with crystalline authority. Director Morrison herself stepped out, her silver hair catching sunlight like a blade. Behind them, Marcus heard the low hum of the pursuit vehicles closing distance, trapping them in a supernatural vice. "Mr. Rodriguez." Morrison's voice carried impossible clarity across the 100 yards separating them. "You've caused considerable disruption to the natural order. Time to correct that mistake." Marcus brought the motorcycle to a stop, engine idling, calculating options with the rapid-fire assessment skills that had kept patients alive in crisis situations. The road ahead was blocked. The forest was too dense for the motorcycle, but they weren't just running anymore. They were protected witnesses in an active investigation, and Morrison couldn't eliminate them without consequences. "Funny thing about investigations, Director," Sarah called out, rising from the sidecar with Hope cradled protectively in her arms. "They tend to leave trails, evidence that persists even if the investigators don't." Morrison's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, the first crack in supernatural bureaucratic composure. "Agent Winters, your reconstruction appears to have developed complications. We can fix that, return the anomaly and submit to memory rehabilitation. The compliance review will conclude that your programming was functioning normally." The offer hung in the air like poisoned honey. Marcus watched Sarah's face, seeing the moment when her restored identity fully crystallized into choice. She'd been given the chance to return to program safety, to let someone else carry the weight of moral decisions. Instead, she stepped closer to Marcus, forming a protective triangle around Hope with their bodies. "I remember everything now," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced death twice and chosen purpose both times. "Every unauthorized resurrection you've covered up, every family destroyed to maintain your version of cosmic balance, every operative like me, rebuilt as weapons and sent to clean up your mistakes." Hope's golden glow suddenly intensified, no longer flickering but burning steady as a lighthouse beacon. The baby was responding to their combined resolve, drawing strength from the family bond they'd forged in supernatural fire. Her very existence was proof that love could transcend death, that some connections were stronger than bureaucratic convenience. Marcus felt the shift in cosmic pressure like a change in atmospheric conditions. Morrison had made a tactical error by confronting them openly. Every moment this standoff continued, more evidence accumulated that the Threshold Division was willing to use force against protected witnesses. The documentation he'd scattered across the normal world would be impossible to suppress if they disappeared now. "You're trapped, Morrison," he said, dismounting from the motorcycle but staying within arm's reach of his family. "Kill us, and you prove everything Sarah uncovered about unauthorized operations. Let us live, and we reach the compliance board with enough evidence to trigger a full investigation. Either way, your system of cosmic control is finished." The director's composure finally cracked completely, revealing something ancient and desperate beneath the bureaucratic mask. "You have no idea what you're unleashing. The boundary between life and death exists for reasons your limited human perspective cannot comprehend. Some prayers are answered wrongly. Some love becomes obsession that threatens reality itself." "Then let the compliance board decide that," Marcus replied. "Unless you're admitting that your entire division has been operating outside cosmic law." Morrison raised one hand, and Marcus felt the air around them begin to crystallize with the same energy that had tried to unmake Hope in the diner. But this time was different. Hope was fully anchored now. Sarah's true identity had been restored, and their family bond existed in defiance of every rule the Threshold Division claimed to enforce. The real test wasn't whether they could survive Morrison's attack. It was whether their impossible love was stronger than the cosmic bureaucracy's fear of change. Hope's golden light flared like a newborn star, and Marcus felt 15 years of guilt transform into pure determination. Everything he'd learned about emergency medicine, about fighting for patients when the odds were impossible, about refusing to let death win, It all crystallized into this moment. The final test had begun. The crystalline energy erupted from Morrison's outstretched hand like frozen lightning, but Hope's golden radiance met it head-on with the fury of answered prayers and defiant love. Marcus felt the collision as a physical force that drove him to his knees, but he fought through the supernatural pressure to shield his family with his own body. "You cannot comprehend what you're protecting," Morrison screamed, her bureaucratic mask completely shattered to reveal something ancient and terrible. "That child is an abomination, a wound in reality that will never stop bleeding." Sarah pressed Hope against her chest, the baby's light pulsing in rhythm with their combined heartbeats. "She's our daughter," Sarah said, and those simple words carried more power than all of Morrison's cosmic authority. "And we're taking her home." The director's attack intensified, reality warping around them like heated glass. Marcus watched the asphalt beneath their feet begin to crack and splinter as competing forces of existence battled for dominance. Trees along the highway aged decades in seconds, then reversed to saplings, then aged again as time itself became a weapon in Morrison's arsenal. But Hope's golden glow held steady against the chaos, creating a bubble of sanctuary around her family. More than that, Marcus could feel her power growing stronger with each passing moment, fed by their unwavering commitment to protect her. The baby who shouldn't exist was becoming an anchor point for everything that was right about defying impossible odds. "She's not the abomination here," Marcus said, rising to his feet with the determined calm that had carried him through countless medical emergencies. "You are. You've been playing God with people's lives, deciding who deserves second chances and who doesn't. The real wound in reality is your entire corrupt system." Morrison's eyes blazed with supernatural fury as she realized her attack was failing. The crystalline energy that should have unmade all three of them was being absorbed and transformed by Hope's impossible existence, turning bureaucratic control into pure protective love. "Hawkins!" The director barked to her subordinates. "Containment Protocol 7. Authorization is no longer required." Marcus heard the other Guardian vehicles powering up with a sound like reality tearing at its seams. Whatever Containment Protocol 7 entailed, it was clearly designed to eliminate problems too large for subtle manipulation. But as the supernatural weapons charged, Marcus felt his emergency medical training merge with 15 years of hard-earned wisdom about fighting for lost causes. "Sarah," he said quietly, never taking his eyes off Morrison. "Remember what you said about investigations leaving trails? Time to follow one." Sarah's restored investigator instincts caught his meaning instantly. While Morrison had been focused on direct confrontation, she'd made a crucial tactical error. She'd revealed the existence of unauthorized protocols in front of witnesses who'd already documented everything. Her own desperation was becoming evidence of systematic corruption. "Director Morrison," Sarah called out with official authority, "as a cosmic investigator operating under Compliance Board protection, I'm formally documenting your use of lethal force against protected witnesses. You're creating exactly the kind of evidence trail that will trigger mandatory review of your entire division." The words hit Morrison like physical blows. Marcus watched the director's face cycle through rage, calculation, and growing horror as she realized the trap they'd constructed around her. Every action she took to eliminate them was being recorded in the cosmic record as proof of the conspiracy Sarah had uncovered. But Morrison was beyond caring about consequences now, her ancient desperation overriding bureaucratic caution. "Then I'll make sure there are no witnesses left to testify," she snarled, raising both hands as reality began to fracture around them like breaking glass. This was it. The moment Marcus had been preparing for since the night he'd failed to save Elena. Not just another medical emergency where someone else's life hung in the balance, but the final test of whether love could overcome the universe's apparent indifference to human suffering. Hope began to wail, not with infant distress, but with the sound of pure defiance that echoed off the mountains and seemed to shake the foundations of existence itself. Her golden light exploded outward like a supernova, and Marcus felt their family bond snap into perfect focus. He was no longer just a failed paramedic carrying 15 years of guilt. Sarah was no longer just a reconstructed operative struggling with stolen memories. Hope was no longer just an impossible child caught between worlds. They were a family forged in supernatural fire, anchored by love that had already survived death once and refused to surrender to cosmic bureaucracy now. Whatever Morrison unleashed next, they would face it together. The final confrontation erupted around them with the force of colliding realities, but Marcus felt only clarity as he stepped forward to meet the director's desperation with his own unshakable determination to protect what mattered most. The battle for Hope's right to exist had become a war for the soul of existence itself. The world exploded into fragments of screaming light and crystalline death as Morrison unleashed her final gambit. Marcus felt reality tear apart around them like tissue paper, the highway buckling into impossible geometries as the director channeled enough power to erase their entire section of existence from the cosmic record. But in that moment of absolute destruction, Marcus finally understood what Elena's prayer had truly asked for, not just Hope's life, but the complete transformation of a broken system that treated love as an aberration to be corrected. "Hope!" he shouted over the apocalyptic roar, reaching toward his daughter as Sarah's protective grip began to weaken under the supernatural assault. The baby's golden radiance was dimming, overwhelmed by Morrison's desperate fury, and Marcus could feel their family bond stretching toward the breaking point. The choice crystallized with the brutal clarity of a medical emergency. Someone had to anchor Hope's existence while the others escaped. Someone had to stay behind and channel 15 years of accumulated guilt into one final act of redemption. Marcus had spent his entire adult life learning how to make impossible decisions under pressure. Which patient to treat first when resources were limited, when to fight death and when to let go, how to carry the weight of lives he couldn't save while still showing up for the ones he could. This was the same choice, magnified to cosmic proportions. "Take her and run," he told Sarah, his voice carrying the absolute authority of a paramedic making life or death decisions. "I'll hold Morrison here." "Marcus, no." Sarah's eyes blazed with the fury of someone who'd already lost everything once. "We face this together or not at all." But Marcus was already moving, stepping between his family and the director's apocalyptic attack. He could feel Morrison's power clawing at his consciousness, trying to convince reality that he'd never existed, that the night he'd failed Elena had played out differently, that Hope had never been born at all. Instead of fighting the cosmic erasure, Marcus embraced it. He opened himself completely to Morrison's assault, drawing her attention and power away from Sarah and Hope. Every year of guilt, every sleepless night replaying Elena's death, every moment he'd wished he could trade his life for hers, he fed it all into the supernatural maelstrom, using his own accumulated pain as fuel for one final act of healing. "You want to erase mistakes, Morrison?" Marcus shouted as crystalline energy tore through his body like frozen lightning. "Start with me. I'm the one who failed to save her. I'm the one who prayed for impossible things. Everything that happened afterward is my responsibility." Hope's golden light flared in desperate response to her father's sacrifice, but Marcus could already feel the family bond stretching across an impossible distance as Morrison's power began rewriting his existence. The pain was beyond description, not physical destruction but ontological dissolution, the systematic removal of his impact on the world. But even as his memories began fragmenting, Marcus held on to one crucial realization. He wasn't dying. He was becoming something else. A bridge between worlds, an anchor point that would allow Hope to exist without constantly battling cosmic bureaucracy for the right to live. The night Elena died, he'd whispered a promise to keep fighting for impossible cases. Now he understood that some battles required soldiers willing to become part of the battlefield itself. Sarah was screaming his name, but her voice sounded increasingly distant as Morrison's erasure took hold. Hope's light was pulsing frantically, trying to maintain their connection, but Marcus could feel himself slipping beyond the reach of normal existence into something larger and more fundamental. This was the price of victory. Not death, but transformation into something that could protect his family from cosmic interference forever. Marcus Rodriguez, The failed paramedic was being unmade, but something new was being born in his place. A guardian spirit, a supernatural immune system, a love so absolute that even the bureaucracy of death couldn't contain it. Morrison's triumphant laughter cut through the chaos as Marcus's physical form began dissolving into golden motes of light that swirled around Hope like protective fireflies. Finally, the anomaly's anchor is broken. Now I can... But the director's victory speech died as she realized what was actually happening. Marcus wasn't being destroyed. He was being absorbed into Hope's impossible existence, becoming part of the cosmic fabric that allowed her to live. Their family bond hadn't broken. It had evolved beyond anything the threshold division's limited understanding could manipulate or undo. Hope's wails of grief transformed into something else entirely. A sound of pure, defiant joy that seemed to rewrite the fundamental laws of reality around them. Morrison's crystalline attack shattered against the baby's renewed radiance like ice against sunlight. Marcus felt himself scatter into 1,000 golden sparks, but each spark carried his absolute determination to protect what mattered most. He was everywhere and nowhere, existing in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between question and answer, in the eternal moment when love refuses to surrender to loss. Victory was theirs, but the cost would echo through every moment of Hope's impossible life. The golden sparks that had been Marcus Rodriguez swirled around Hope like a protective constellation, and Sarah watched in stunned silence as the impossible became inevitable. The baby's cries faded to gentle cooing as the motes of light settled into her skin, creating faint, luminescent patterns that pulsed in rhythm with her tiny heartbeat. Marcus was gone, but he was also more present than he'd ever been, woven into the very essence of their daughter's existence. Morrison stood frozen in the aftermath of her failed assault, crystalline energy still crackling around her fingers, but now directionless and impotent. The director's ancient face cycled through expressions of rage, confusion, and growing horror as she realized the magnitude of her tactical error. By trying to erase Marcus, she'd instead enabled him to transcend every limitation the threshold division used to control supernatural anomalies. "What have you done?" Morrison whispered, her bureaucratic composure cracking like ice under pressure. "The anchor protocols, they should have severed the connection completely." Sarah clutched Hope against her chest, feeling the warmth of Marcus's transformed presence radiating through their daughter's impossible existence. The baby's golden glow had stabilized into something deeper than mere light. It was pure protective love made manifest, a cosmic immune system that would forever shield her from bureaucratic interference. "You never understood what you were fighting," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced death twice and chosen love both times. This was never about cosmic balance or reality maintenance. It was about family, and families don't follow your rules. The other Guardian vehicles that had surrounded them began powering down, their occupants uncertain how to proceed without Morrison's direct orders. The director's unauthorized use of Containment Protocol 7 had created exactly the kind of evidence trail that would trigger mandatory compliance board intervention, and every agent present knew that their careers, and possibly their existence, now depended on distancing themselves from Morrison's actions. Agent Hawkins emerged from the lead vehicle, his expression carefully neutral as he approached the standoff. "Director Morrison," he said formally, "I'm receiving priority communications from the Compliance Board. They're requesting immediate cessation of field operations and your return for emergency consultation." Morrison's face contorted with fury as she realized the trap closing around her. Decades of carefully maintained authority were dissolving in real time as her subordinates chose bureaucratic survival over loyalty to a superior who'd clearly violated cosmic law. The investigation Sarah had initiated was no longer just gathering evidence. It was actively dismantling the power structure Morrison had built through fear and manipulation. "You think this ends anything?" Morrison snarled, but her voice carried the hollow desperation of someone watching their empire crumble. "The child is still an abomination. Her very existence undermines the natural order. Eventually someone will finish what I started." Hope stirred in Sarah's arms, And for a moment the baby's eyes opened to reveal depths of understanding that belonged to no infant born through normal means. The golden patterns beneath her skin pulsed brighter, and Sarah felt Marcus's presence strengthen in response to the threat, not gone, but transformed into something that could protect their daughter across dimensions and realities. "Let them try," Sarah said simply. "Marcus gave her something you'll never understand, a father's love that transcends death itself. She's not alone, and she never will be." The words carried absolute finality, and Morrison seemed to shrink under their weight. The director's supernatural authority had always depended on cosmic bureaucracy's ability to isolate anomalies from their support systems, to force impossible choices between love and survival. But Marcus's sacrifice had evolved their family bond beyond anything the Threshold Division's limited paradigms could manipulate or destroy. Agent Hawkins stepped forward with practiced efficiency. "Director Morrison, you're required to surrender your field authorization pending Compliance Board review. Agent Winters, you and the protected anomaly are cleared for immediate transport to secure facilities where you can complete your testimony without interference." Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty as she processed the magnitude of what came next. The investigation she'd died to begin 15 years ago would finally reach completion, but the cost had transformed her family in ways that made normal existence impossible. Hope would grow up knowing her father existed in the spaces between heartbeats, present but untouchable. Love made manifest but forever changed. But as she looked down at her daughter's peaceful face, Sarah realized that some victories required accepting transformation rather than demanding restoration. Marcus had found his redemption not by undoing his failure to save Elena, but by ensuring that Hope would never face the choice between love and survival that had destroyed so many others. The golden patterns beneath Hope's skin pulsed once more, and Sarah felt Marcus's presence like a whispered promise that some bonds transcend bureaucracy, that some love refuses to be contained by death or cosmic law, and that families forged in supernatural fire burn bright enough to illuminate even the darkest corners of existence. Morrison's reign of bureaucratic terror was ending, but Hope's impossible life was just beginning. The resolution had come at the ultimate price, but victory belonged to love that had learned to evolve rather than surrender. The aftermath would reshape everything, but they had survived, together, in ways the universe was still learning to understand. The return. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the doorway of a small apartment in Portland's Pearl District, watching Hope sleep in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through windows Marcus would never again see with physical eyes. The baby had grown impossibly fast, as if her father's transformed presence accelerated more than just her protection from cosmic interference. The golden patterns beneath her skin had settled into barely visible traces that pulsed strongest during sleep, when the barrier between worlds grew thin enough for deeper connection. The Compliance Board's investigation had concluded with Morrison's removal from all dimensional oversight duties and the systematic dismantling of unauthorized containment protocols across 17 different realities. Sarah's testimony had triggered the largest reform of supernatural bureaucracy in recorded cosmic history, but victory felt hollow when shared only with the memory of the man who'd made it possible. Her apartment was smaller than the life they'd planned together, furnished with the careful efficiency of someone learning to build a home for 2 people instead of 3. A rocking chair by the window where she fed Hope while feeling Marcus's presence strongest in the golden hour before sunset. A bookshelf filled with both investigative manuals and parenting guides, the impossible intersection of her restored career and unexpected motherhood. Pictures on the refrigerator, not of family moments they'd shared, but of places she wanted to take Hope when she was old enough to understand her father's sacrifice. The hardest part wasn't Marcus's absence, it was his presence. Hope would coo and reach toward empty air where Sarah felt nothing, tracking movement only her enhanced senses could perceive. During feeding times, the baby would pause and smile as if listening to whispered lullabies from a voice Sarah could only remember at night. When Hope cried, she would settle instantly when Sarah placed her in the specific position where Marcus's transformed consciousness seemed strongest, cradled against her chest where his heartbeat had once been. now replaced by the gentle pulse of golden light beneath their daughter's skin. Sarah had returned to her investigative duties, but everything had changed. Her colleagues treated her with the careful respect reserved for someone who'd challenged the cosmic order and survived, but she could see the uncertainty in their eyes. How do you build relationships with someone whose family transcended normal death? How do you offer comfort to grief that had transformed into something beyond human understanding? She'd tried dating exactly once. A fellow investigator named David, who'd asked her for coffee with genuine kindness and careful interest. The evening had ended awkwardly when Hope began fussing in her carrier, and Sarah had automatically shifted her to the invisible embrace where Marcus's presence offered comfort. David's confused expression as the baby settled against apparently empty air had crystallized the reality Sarah was still learning to accept. Their love story would always be a triangle, with one point existing beyond normal perception. The loneliness was vast but not complete. During quiet evenings when Hope slept and the apartment felt too empty, Sarah would sit in the rocking chair and feel Marcus's consciousness brush against hers like warm wind. Not conversation, that remained impossible, but communion deeper than words, the absolute certainty that he was proud of the mother she'd become, that he saw Hope's first smiles, that his love hadn't diminished but evolved into something that could transcend every limitation death usually imposed. Friends from her previous life had tried to reconnect after news of Morrison's downfall reached civilian social circles, but Sarah found herself unable to explain the woman she'd become. How do you tell old colleagues about dying and being reconstructed from bureaucratic necessity? How do you describe falling in love with a man who sacrificed his physical existence to protect a daughter conceived through cosmic accident? How do you build casual friendships when your deepest relationship exists primarily in the spaces between heartbeats? Instead, she'd found community among other supernatural investigators who understood the cost of loving impossible things. Agent Chen, whose partner existed partially phased between dimensions after a containment breach. Dr. Martinez, whose wife had been transformed into living equation during a mathematics reality incident. People who'd learned that some kinds of love required redefining normalcy rather than choosing between connection and loss. Hope stirred in her sleep, and Sarah felt the familiar flutter of Marcus's attention focusing on their daughter. The baby's golden patterns brightened slightly, and for just a moment Sarah could have sworn she heard the whisper of a familiar voice humming the lullaby he'd sung during those first impossible hours in the abandoned diner. Tomorrow she would return to work investigating another case of cosmic bureaucratic overreach. Hope would spend the day with Mrs. Chen, a retired investigator who understood why some babies required specialized care. They would continue building a life that honored both Marcus's sacrifice and Hope's extraordinary nature. But tonight, Sarah settled into the rocking chair and held her daughter close, feeling the weight of love that had learned to exist across impossible distances. Their family looked nothing like she'd once imagined, but it burned with a devotion that had already reshaped the fundamental laws of supernatural existence. Some returns required accepting transformation rather than demanding restoration. Their love story would continue, just in ways the universe was still learning to understand. The new beginning. 2 years had passed since that fog-drenched October night when everything changed, and Sarah Rodriguez, she'd taken his name in a quiet courthouse ceremony with Hope as her only witness, had learned to measure time in golden moments rather than ordinary days. Hope toddled through their sunlit kitchen on unsteady legs, babbling to invisible companions, while Sarah prepared breakfast. The child had inherited more than Marcus's protective presence. She possessed an intuitive understanding of mechanical things that bordered on supernatural. Yesterday, Sarah had found her fixing the coffee maker by simply placing her tiny hands on its base, the golden patterns beneath her skin pulsing in rhythm with the appliance's internal workings. The machine had brewed perfect coffee for the first time in months. "Daddy's girl," Sarah murmured, watching Hope carefully stack blocks in patterns that seemed to echo the geometric precision Marcus had always brought to motorcycle repair. The child would pause occasionally, tilting her head as if listening to whispered guidance, then adjust her construction with deliberate purpose. The apartment had evolved into something that honored all three of them. Marcus's tools hung in a place of pride above Hope's toy chest, not as memorial, but as working inheritance waiting for small hands to grow large enough to wield them. Sarah had started a savings account for the motorcycle shop Hope would undoubtedly want to open someday, understanding instinctively that their daughter would follow her father's path of fixing broken things, just on a scale that might reshape reality itself. Her investigative work had transformed as well. Director Morrison's replacement, a pragmatic woman named Stevens who'd spent decades cleaning up cosmic messes, had created a new division specifically for cases involving transcendent love. Sarah led the team, helping other families navigate the impossible bureaucracy that governed supernatural existence. Last month, they'd successfully prevented the forced separation of a couple whose bond had accidentally created a small pocket dimension. The week before, they'd negotiated visitation rights for a father whose consciousness had been distributed across 17 parallel timelines. Each case reminded Sarah that their story wasn't unique in its impossibility, only in its resolution. Love found ways to evolve beyond every limitation death and cosmic law attempted to impose, but survival required learning new languages of connection, new definitions of presence and family. Hope's afternoon nap had become Sarah's sacred time for communion with Marcus. She would sit in the rocking chair, holding their sleeping daughter, and feel his consciousness strengthen as Hope's barriers relaxed. No words passed between them. That remained beyond the boundaries of his transformed existence. But Sarah had learned to read the subtle changes in Hope's breathing, the way the golden light pulsed beneath her skin when Marcus was closest to the surface. Today she sensed something different, a settling, as if he'd finally found peace within the impossible space he now occupied. Hope stirred and opened eyes that reflected depths Marcus had never possessed in life, but had somehow gained through transcendence. "He's proud," Sarah whispered to their daughter, feeling the truth of it resonate through the golden patterns that connected all three of them. "He sees what you're becoming." Hope reached up with chubby fingers, touching Sarah's cheek with surprising gentleness, and for one eternal moment, Sarah felt Marcus's touch layered beneath their daughter's. The sensation carried everything words couldn't convey: gratitude for the mother she'd become, amazement at the child they'd created, and love that had learned to exist across dimensions without diminishing. Mrs. Chen had been right during those difficult early months. Some families required redefining normal rather than surrendering to loss. Their normal included bedtime stories told to two listeners, one visible and one existing in the spaces between heartbeats. Birthday celebrations, where Hope would carefully save a piece of cake for Daddy that would disappear by morning in ways Sarah had stopped questioning. Lullabies sung in harmony with a voice only Hope could fully hear. As evening settled over Portland, Sarah prepared dinner, while Hope played contentedly nearby, their domestic routine a testament to love's stubborn refusal to be contained by death. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Hope's extraordinary nature was becoming harder to disguise as she grew, and questions would eventually need answers. But tonight they were simply a family sharing space across impossible distances. The abandoned diner on Highway 101 where Hope had been born had been converted into a memorial garden by local paranormal investigators, but Sarah knew the real memorial lived in every moment she and Hope shared. Marcus's sacrifice hadn't just protected their daughter, it had proven that some bonds burn bright enough to illuminate the darkest corners of existence. Hope's laughter filled the apartment as she discovered her blocks now glowed faintly in the twilight, responding to her touch with inherited light. Sarah smiled, feeling Marcus's joy echo through their daughter's wonder. They were no longer the family Marcus had dreamed of becoming, but they had become something even more extraordinary. Proof that love transcends every limitation, evolving rather than surrendering, burning eternal in forms the universe was still learning to understand. Some beginnings required ending everything you thought you knew about possible.